Rome. The name evokes images of power law and an empire that shaped the Western world. We think we know them. We've seen them in movies, endless debauched feasts, mad emperors, and a decadence that led to collapse. But what if I told you that this image, this picture of wild orgy parties is largely a misunderstanding, and that the truth is stranger, more calculated, and far darker than anything Hollywood dares to portray? This is not just a story of decadence. This is a journey into the psychological operating system of a civilization where sex was not a private act. It was a language written in flesh and power, used to define who was a citizen and who was property, who was the ruler and who was the ruled. Today we will strip away the toga to explore a world where phalluses were worn as amulets, where emperors married other men in public ceremonies, and where the chastity of a priestess could determine the fate of an entire city. We will decode how the Romans used sex as a political weapon, a tool of social control, and a manifesto of status. And as we lift this veil of secrecy, you will realize that for the Romans, the question was never just who did you sleep with, but what did you do with them? Because in their world, the answer to that question could elevate you to the heights of power or cast you into the abyss of disgrace. To understand anything about Roman sexuality, you must forget modern concepts of homosexuality, heterosexuality, or bisexuality. Those labels were meaningless to them. For the Romans, only one measure mattered in every sexual interaction: dominance. Their fundamental rule was encapsulated in a single word: vir. This word means man, but it carried a deeper meaning of virtue, strength, and citizenship. A true vir was a man who demonstrated dominance in every sphere of life, in war and politics, and most importantly, in the bedroom. And that dominance was defined in an extremely specific way: who was the penetrator. As long as a male Roman citizen played the active penetrating role, it didn't matter who his partner was. It could be his wife, a female slave, a male slave, a male or female prostitute. The act reinforced his vir status, affirming his masculinity and power. Conversely, a male Roman citizen who willingly took the passive penetrated role faced complete social ruin. He would be labeled with derogatory terms like senatus, an effeminate man, one who had forsaken his masculinity. Being branded a senatus stripped him of everything. He would be mocked in public speeches, deemed untrustworthy to testify in court, and considered unfit to hold political office. This was not a matter of morality, but a matter of status. Sex was a performance of power. The penetrator was the dominator. The penetrated was the dominated. This simple but brutal rule was the key to decoding every strange sexual behavior of the Romans. It explains why an emperor could openly sleep with his male soldiers and still be considered powerful, but a rival politician could have his career destroyed by a mere hint that he preferred the passive role. Their entire society was built on the fear of being penetrated and the glorification of penetration as a symbol of supreme power. If the active role was a symbol of power, then the emperor, the most powerful man in the world, had to be the ultimate sexual dominator. And some emperors took this concept to the most insane extremes, turning the entire empire into a stage for their desires. Let's start with Caligula. The historian Suetonius recounts that Caligula not only committed incest with all his sisters, but did so openly at imperial banquets. But his most shocking act was turning his palace into a high-class brothel. He gathered the wives and daughters of the most distinguished senators and forced them to serve as prostitutes. This was not just about satisfying base desires. It was a calculated political act. By forcing the most powerful men in Rome to watch their wives and daughters be turned into sexual instruments for the emperor, Caligula performed the ultimate act of humiliation. He was saying, your power is nothing. Even the women of your families belong to me. It was dominance, displayed in its rawest and most brutal form. But perhaps no one surpassed Nero in terms of bizarre behavior. Nero staged 2 shocking public weddings. In one ceremony, he played the bride and married one of his freedmen named Pythagoras. Nero wore a wedding dress, donned a veil, and performed all the traditional rituals of a Roman bride. By publicly taking the passive female role, he shattered every social rule. But then he did the opposite. He found a young boy named Sporus, who bore a resemblance to his deceased wife Poppaea. Nero ordered Sporus to be castrated, dressed him in women's clothing, and then married him in a grand ceremony where Nero played the groom. He paraded his new bride around in public processions. To us, these are the actions of a madman, but to Nero, they were a statement of absolute power. He was saying, "I am the emperor. The rules of gender and status do not apply to me. I can be man, woman, or both. I can penetrate and be penetrated at will because I stand above all of you." It was the ultimate display of power, the ability to reshape reality according to his whims. The Romans' obsession with penetration permeated every corner of daily life in ways both overt and surprising. If you strolled down a street in Pompeii, you would see phalluses everywhere. They were carved on walls, hung in front of shops, and even worn as small amulets called fascinus. For the Romans, the image of a phallus was not merely erotic. It was a powerful symbol of protection. They believed an erect phallus had the power to ward off the evil eye and protect against misfortune. Soldiers wore it on the battlefield. Children wore it around their necks. It was a public acknowledgement that the power of penetration, the power of masculinity, was the source of luck and safety. But while Roman society glorified the symbol of penetration, they demanded absolute chastity from one particular group of women, the Vestal Virgins. These were the priestesses of Vesta, the goddess of the hearth and home. They were 6 women chosen from the most noble families to serve for 30 years. Their duty was to keep the sacred fire of Vesta burning eternally. This flame was believed to be directly tied to the very survival of Rome itself. And to do so, they had to maintain absolute chastity. Their virginity was not a matter of personal morality, it was a matter of national security. A Vestal Virgin's untouched body, unpenetrated, was seen as a spiritual bulwark protecting Rome. If a Vestal Virgin was found to have broken her vow of chastity, the punishment was utterly horrific. Because their blood was sacred and could not be spilled, they could not be executed in the usual manner. Instead, they faced one of the most terrifying deaths the Romans could devise: being buried alive. The accused Vestal would be taken to an underground tomb provided with a small amount of food, water, and an oil lamp. Then, the entrance would be sealed, leaving her in darkness to die slowly of suffocation or starvation. Her lover, if discovered, would be publicly beaten to death. This contrast is staggering: a society that worshipped the phallus as a symbol of protection, yet was willing to bury a woman alive for being penetrated. This reveals that their obsession was not about sex, but about control. Controlling penetration, whether symbolic or literal, was how they believed they could control both the physical and supernatural worlds. So what about those infamous orgy parties? The image of drunken, half-naked Romans engaging in chaotic group sex has become an icon of decadence. The truth is, the term orgy originally referred to secret religious rituals, particularly those of cults, like that of Bacchus, and these could involve ritualistic sexual acts. But the typical dinner parties of the Roman elite, known as convivium, were entirely different. Yes, they could last for hours with lavish food and wine. Yes, there might be sensual entertainment like dancers or musicians. And yes, sexual activity could occur, but it was not a chaotic group orgy. A convivium was a carefully structured social event, an opportunity to display wealth status and erudition. Guests would recline on couches discussing politics and philosophy. Women from the upper classes could also attend, which was a contrast to Greece. If sexual activity did occur at these parties, it typically followed the dominance rules we've discussed. The host might engage with slaves in front of guests to demonstrate his power and wealth. But the idea of equal status citizens engaging in a collective orgy was extremely rare and would have been considered utterly disgraceful, stripping all participants of their status. So where did the image of these orgy parties come from? Largely from later Christian writers who wanted to portray pagan Roman society as morally corrupt to elevate their own values. And it also came from Roman satirical poets like Juvenal and Martial, who exaggerated the worst behaviors of the elite to critique society. They were like today's tabloid journalists. The myth of the orgy was far more compelling than the reality, but the reality reveals much more about how Roman society actually functioned. All these complex rules about status and dominance applied to only one group: male Roman citizens. For the millions of others in the empire, especially slaves, there were no rules at all. For a slave, the concept of sexual consent did not exist. Their body did not belong to them. It belonged to their master. A slave, whether male or female, old or young, was entirely available for the sexual use of their master's family, and even their master's guests. Resistance could lead to torture or death. This is the undeniable dark side of Roman society. The sexual freedom of the Roman man was built directly on the sexual enslavement of countless others. And for those who were not slaves but needed money, there was a state-sanctioned industry: prostitution. Roman brothels, known as lupanar, were an integral part of every city. They were licensed, taxed, and regulated by the state. The surviving walls of brothels in Pompeii tell a vivid story. They were decorated with erotic paintings depicting the services available, like a menu. The rooms were small, cramped with simple stone beds. Prostitutes, often slaves or former slaves, worked in harsh conditions for extremely low prices. The existence of an organized prostitution industry reveals another facet of the Roman psyche. They viewed male sexual desire as a natural force that needed to be satisfied. By providing a state-approved outlet, they believed they were maintaining social order, protecting the sanctity of upper-class women from unrestrained desires. Once again, it was about control. Controlling desire, controlling bodies, and controlling society. As we look back, the picture of Roman sexuality becomes clearer. It was not a picture of random decadence. It was a sophisticatedly designed system, a mirror reflecting the power structure of the empire itself. We've just seen how the Romans turned sex into a tool of earthly power, a language of social dominance. But as they expanded their empire and conquered Egypt, they encountered a civilization with an entirely different worldview. A civilization where sex was not just about dominating others in this life, but was also the key to ensuring eternal rebirth and maintaining the cosmic order of the gods. If you want to explore a world where gods could commit incest to create the universe, where the phallus of a deceased king was worshipped as a symbol of resurrection, and where sexual rituals were believed to defeat death, then you must watch our next video. Click on the video appearing on your screen now, the most shocking sexual practices of ancient Egypt, to step into a world where flesh and divinity become one.